Hi everybody, welcome to the Be a Grants Genius webinar. I'm super excited to be talking to Jessie Ballantyne from the Grants Hub. Jessie, welcome.
Hi.
So we've got a couple of questions to really ask you about all things about grants. I thought just before we move on to that, we might do a couple of quick intros as to who I am and a little bit about Jessie's experience, and then we'll go straight off to the questions. So I am the managing director of an organization called the Frank team. We are a training, mentoring and strategy organization working with young people, and we do a lot of things around leadership training, management, communication skills, and so forth. And so far we worked with around 60,000 young people. So we also work with organizations like local councils to develop things like youth strategies. We always get questions on the name Frank. There is no Frank in the team, but the word Frank stands for no BS. We're really keeping it quite real and honest and upfront with you about really things that matter, skills that matter, and things that don't matter so much. So Jessie, I might maybe get you to introduce yourself from the Grants Hub, a little bit about your experience.
Yep, no worries. So yeah, my name's Jessie. I'm the founder and director of the Grants Hub. So the Grants Hub is an online grant search website, so helping organisations right across Australia find funding for their projects. Essentially, I built the website after seeing the need for a centralised database that was easy for people to use to find funding for their projects.
Yeah.
I used to work at, pardon?
I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I used to work at the City of Casey. I was one of, I think, Australia's first council-appointed grants facilitator, where my role was specifically to help find funding for council, so for their big infrastructure projects and big programs. So that was sort of state and federal government funding that we were targeting for that. Yeah. But another really important part of that role was helping not-for-profit organisations and schools and even some businesses within the City of Casey find other sources of funding to reduce their dependence on council funding and help increase their financial sustainability from other sources.
Great. And I've also just put the best contact if anyone's interested in sort of finding out more about grants or how the Grants Hub can help them. The best email contact is info@thegranthub.com.au. So Jessie, we might move on to the questions. A couple of things I want to really ask you. So what are some of the things you actually do at the Grants Hub?
Yeah, so my job is really diverse. Being the founder of the Grants Hub, you end up doing everything from A through to Z. But now we've got a growing team, so my role is helping roll out improvements to the Grants Hub, helping organisations find that funding. It's the one-to-one contact with organisations right across Australia, and then we've got the consulting stream as well. So that's helping organisations actually apply for the grants after they've found something on the Grants Hub. So yeah, it's pretty diverse, and there's the training elements to it as well. So yeah, it's quite, because we're national and it's a rapidly growing organisation. Yeah, it's really busy, but it's exciting. Yeah, we're working with different groups all the time, so it's great.
And are you finding there are more and more grants available?
Yeah, it's really changing. Yeah, so I would say that there certainly are more grants available now than there ever have been. Yeah. Government funding is certainly a rapidly changing space, and because the political situation in Australia now is quite hostile, really, like governments aren't sort of getting ongoing terms of government, which means there's always changes happening to funding programs. So the government funding is probably getting trickier to access, but other sources of funding are really popping up, which is exciting, and there's lots of organisations and businesses in particular wanting to fund new and innovative programs.
So those are the different types of grants available then. So you talked about government, but these are the other three available?
Yeah, look, that'd be the main ones there. So government, obviously, that's an obvious one that most people think of. Then there's your philanthropic sources. So essentially, quite wealthy people choose to donate certain amounts of money to charity organisations, even some schools. Lots of different grants go out. Animal welfare, there's philanthropic funding is huge. And corporate, more and more corporates. So businesses, big companies are running grant programs themselves now. And then you also get some private donors, so one-offs that will say have a family trust, and they will run a grant program through that. So they would be the main sources of funding out there.
Yeah, great. So with so many grants available, how do you really know which is the best grant to apply for your own needs?
It's a really tricky thing. So for starters, it's finding the grants. Obviously, we would recommend the Grants Hub for finding it, but something that helps you really find grants, just because there are literally thousands of grants out there.
Right.
A big one is reading the selection criteria. So some people just kind of skip that step. They will just read the actual general overview and not get into the selection criteria.
Okay.
You really want to target funding bodies which align with your values and organisational needs. So focus on those things the most. So you'll kind of get a feel for funding bodies sometimes. It sounds a bit odd, but sometimes, we'll look for grants for certain organisations and it's just not a great match, and then you'll come across another one, it's like, okay, they're trying to achieve exactly what we're trying to achieve with our organisation, so they're great ones to try and get on board with.
Yeah.
So focus on those broad kind of level needs and structures first, and then focus on, say, other things such as the funding amount that you need, the deadlines, what grants fit within your timeframes.
Right, okay. And so, when you talked about really targeting the funding bodies which are aligned with values, is it sort of just doing a Google search or looking online, or do you sort of recommend maybe picking up the phone and talking to someone in that organisation?
Definitely ring. Yep. So do what you can online first.
Yeah.
So most funding bodies have got websites. You can read through annual reports, you can look at their vision statements for the year, read through their program guidelines first, and then contact them after that. We always recommend contacting funding bodies, so giving them a phone call where possible. If they don't provide their phone number, send them an email. A lot of funding bodies are excellent at just giving you a very general indication first up of whether they'd be interested at all in your project. So it can save a whole application process.
Yeah.
Or they might even say, yes, our website says we've got 6 priorities for this year, but in fact this next funding round we're only going to focus on 2 of those.
Right,
so you can find that out by contacting a funding body directly. There's sometimes things they'll want to say on the phone that they won't necessarily want to publish broadly for the whole wider public as well.
And I guess you would save a lot of time and effort knowing stuff up front, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So instead of investing all your time preparing an application, going through all those hard yards, like funding applications can take a long time to prepare.
Yeah.
You get those tips straight up. They might even say these are the core areas, so if you want to apply, certainly draw on these certain parts of your program, or they might give you a general funding amount. So sometimes funding bodies might say they fund up to $50,000, but in fact the average grant amount might be around $15,000-$20,000. So it gives you a really good indication then of what you should be applying for.
Fantastic. So what are some other tips and strategies when applying for grants to sort of really give yourself the best chance at success?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, look, some of the tips really sound quite basic, but it's often the basic things that people get wrong, I think.
Yeah, sure.
So number one, make sure that you're eligible to apply. You wouldn't believe how many people submit applications for programs where they're not even actually eligible for them.
Yeah.
So read all of the guidelines, all of the eligibility criteria before you actually start an application. Especially things like a DGR status, which is deductible gift recipient status. So a lot of grants, particularly in the youth and community sector, funding bodies will want to fund organisations with that tax status. So that's a big indication straight away of whether you're eligible or not to apply.
Okay.
Number 2, I've already mentioned, but get in touch with that funding body before you start writing your application.
Yeah.
You can ask them questions directly rather than trying to guess what they're after.
Yeah, sure.
Number 3, people often laugh at this, but it's so true, don't change the format of your grant applications. So sometimes people want to change the font sizes, or they'll widen page margins or whatever. Funding bodies hate it. It just makes their job so much longer to assess.
Right.
Some won't even get applications if you've actually changed those formats.
Okay.
You kind of have to put yourself in the mind of the funding body and think, if you were assessing 300 applications when you've only got a certain number of grants going out, you're probably not going to bother reading the ones where they've changed all your application formats on you.
Yeah, that's right.
Just leave them as is. It's just sometimes they're really difficult application forms to work with, but that's what the funding body's given you, so go with that.
Okay, cool.
Another tip is not using fancy language just for the sake of it. Sometimes people want to throw in all these big things but then forget to actually just make a clear statement about what their project is about. By all means, if you've got research and strong evidence and you really are an expert in your field, use that language, but also make sure that your everyday person can understand what you're writing about. So make sure they're clear and concise. Another one is make sure you answer every question. in an application form. So even if you don't think a question applies to you, write NA or not applicable, something just to indicate that you've at least seen that question and that you haven't completely forgotten to answer it. And another one, the last tip there is make sure your budget adds up. So both your income and your expenditure columns should be the exact same amount at the bottom. That's one that a lot of people forget to check. So in your income, you should put in the grant that you're applying for. So if you want to apply for $20,000, make sure that $20,000 grant is in your income column, and then you can also show how that's going to get spent in your budget.
That's a great tip that sometimes you just get forgotten when you're getting into the really nitty-gritty of grant writing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, people, you think of the big things, but there is the monetary, the budget side, obviously, as well. Just get things double checked as well. So don't just write your application yourself. Get someone else in your organisation. And when it comes to budgeting, particularly say your financial person or your accountant, whoever it is, just get someone to double check what you're writing about.
Oh, no, excellent tips, excellent tips. I wanted to ask you sort of when we get down to the actual application, are there more important elements in comparison to others? How do you know which is important?
Yeah, so I mean essentially, look, every part is important, each aspect of a grant application. That said, when you read the grant guidelines and especially the selection criteria, you'll usually get a pretty good indication of what the funding body wants to focus on.
Right. Okay.
So if we're thinking about youth and community grants, they might want to fund youth between the ages of 12 to 15. So that's important. You need to make sure, even if your organisation does programs for people aged 12 to 21, make sure you focus your application on the 12 to 15-year-olds if that's what your funding body is wanting to fund. Same thing for innovative programs. If they want to fund, if they're mentioning innovation, new ideas, latest technology, if they're mentioning those kinds of things in their grant documentation, they're the things you really want to draw on in your grant application. So just try and align your application with the funding body's documentations, whether that is the grant application forms and guidelines or whether that's their annual reports and those other broader statements. Try and learn a lot about the funding body before you submit an application to them.
Right, so you just really want to focus down and narrow what they're really looking for, their focus, their most important.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. And many funding bodies will say these are our 5 selection criteria, so make sure you really meet it, if not all of them, at least as many of those selection criteria as you can when you're writing your application.
Fantastic tips, Jessie. So to be really successful at both grant seeking and grant writing, are there any recommendations from your end that you sort of share with us?
Yeah, sure. We always try and recommend that people be strategic rather than ad hoc in their approach to grant applications. Yeah. A lot of people try and chase the money, essentially. So it's definitely tempting for people to do that, particularly organisations that don't have a lot of money to work with. Yeah. They might see, there's a new state government grant for targeting ice projects that's just been announced. That's in Victoria. There's a new one. Right. So there'll be some organisations that just suddenly want to try and run an ice prevention program to get that $10,000. That's not a great way to work. Okay. You end up trying to run programs where you don't even have expertise in, or you don't actually have the time to manage those programs as well. Yeah. So grants, it's not just submitting your application that takes time, but you do have to report back to funding bodies and make sure you're actually doing what you've said you're going to do. Yeah. So that's a reason to be strategic in it. Work out what your plans are for, say, the next 12 months, even 6 months, and find grants which meet those existing aims and needs. Yeah, so always try and be proactive. There's a whole range of things you can use to help you plan out a grants sort of a strategy. We can do that at the Grants Hub, but you could even sit there yourself and search through grants and work out, a little calendar for your organisation of which ones you want to apply for in which months. And are you going to, focus on one bigger application, or do you want to go for lots of smaller ones? So there's a whole range of ways that you can do that. But certainly, try and be more strategic. Don't chase the money. Go for things that are going to directly align with what you're already aiming to do.
Yeah, no, I like that idea of a 12-month plan and really sort of slotting in which grants fit in instead of trying to do it the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we help organisations do that all the time. They might say to us, These are our next, our 5 core areas of work for the next 12 months. Here's all the different subcategories within that, and then you can try and find grants to directly align with those things. You can also then see your funding gaps. So you might suddenly realise, oh, okay, there's going to be a lot of grants for, let's say, at-risk youth around the sort of 15 to 18-year-old age bracket.
Yeah.
And then you might realise that suddenly your organisational resources need to get spent in other areas where you're not going to get grant funding coming in. So that's another benefit of it. It's just maximising your own resources to work in harmony, really, with the grants you're going for.
Cool. And from your experience, Jessie, what are some of the common mistakes you see when people are looking for applying for grants?
Yeah, sure. Again, chasing the money rather than focusing on existing needs.
Yeah.
Clearly that's a big one. Budgets that don't add up, that's really common.
Okay.
That would be one of the most common things we see actually, which is kind of surprising, but at the same time, yeah, it's a tricky one. A lot of people who write grant applications like to write rather than think about the maths, so make sure you've got both sides in there.
Mm-hmm.
Also, not including a financial contribution from your own organisation that's applying. So it's not always required, but it's usually recommended that you do.
Right.
Basically, it shows a funding body that you're willing to contribute to this. You believe in it so much that you are willing to contribute some funds to it yourself. It's not just something that you've seen that $10, $50, $100,000 and you want to suddenly go for it.
Yeah.
And financial contributions too, they don't have to be monetary contributions. They can often be an in-kind contribution.
Right.
So in-kind is essentially something that you're contributing to your project that's not costing your organisation anything. So you might have a graphic designer that's willing to donate their time. So that is an in-kind contribution. You can calculate that, what they would usually charge, and then you can say that they're donating that. So that's, a form of income for your project.
Right.
And then lots of jargon. People add in a lot of things, a lot of big words which don't necessarily make sense or don't clearly describe what the project is. So, make sure what you're writing about is something that your everyday person can actually pick up and understand as well.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, showing your expertise in the area too and supporting it by research or evidence when required. But yeah, some of the, keep things simple, make sure you answer all your questions correctly, and align things with the funding body.
Jessie, I've learned so much just from these sort of 5 to 10 minutes. I really want to thank you. I mean, I think that some of the stuff you shared is really the core things or core approach when looking at grants and really seeing how grants can be part of the funding strategy. So I really want to thank you for your time. I'm going to add your contact details at the end of this slide, but I just want to, as far as to the audience who's listening, if there's any other topics like we've spoken about with Jessie around anything in the youth or community sector, please email us or get in touch with us and let us know so we can go and chat to the experts like Jessie and invite them for webinars like this. I'm just going to put our contact details onto this slide. So if you want to get in touch with the Grants Hub, that's the email address. And of course, if you want to get in touch with the Frank team, that's our email address, or you can find us on Facebook. Jessie, once again, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure a lot of people will find what you said really useful, and of course we wish you all the best with your growing business.